Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success. I'm Therese, a change strategist and practitioner with over 20 years of experience designing and delivering impactful change programs across various industries. In this podcast, I share real-world practical strategies to help you create and deliver positive change experiences, whether you're a leader, practitioner, or someone looking to bring new ways of working to life. In today's fast-paced world, change is constant. Here we focus on how you can put people at the centre of your change strategy, because people with a sense of purpose are the most important link in driving performance. So if you're ready to create meaningful change and achieve all the success that comes with it, keep listening. Together, let's change the conversation and take it to the next level. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese and I'm the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. I'd like to acknowledge that I am recording on Tharawal country and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I am recording, and to elders both past, present and emerging. So today we're going to talk about the critical path in change. If you're aware of how projects work, one of the first questions that you should be asking is, what's on the critical path? So let's talk about critical path in projects. What a critical path is that they are the tasks, the non-negotiable tasks, that you cannot start another task until a predecessor is completed. When looking at MVP in the project space, then from a change perspective, and the driver being speed, cost, then really what you're looking at from a change perspective is what is the bare minimum when it comes to the discipline, so you can support getting it across the line. Now, part of it depends upon the impact of the change and even the impact of the MVP. Change effort doesn't equate to the same thing as project effort, because even if it's a small group who are impacted, you typically are doing the same amount of effort. You're doing the comms, you're doing training, whether it be just for one group rather than three groups, but you're still having to create everything. You're having to create your training material, you're having to create communications, you're having to create feedback loops, and you're still having to manage a team through it and work with leadership on that. So yes, the span of the impact may mean even more effort, but just remember that to have the conversation that from a change effort perspective, the perception may be there's less functionality being put through, but the requirement and the capability requirement and the approach still needs to be designed, delivered, embedded. So it doesn't necessarily equate to a minimal change effort, just because there might be some design elements which are no longer in the solution. And that includes even in the policy. It might include a whole raft of things around the change in approach. So through all these years of effort, repetition in different environments for different types of change, I've developed what I would call the critical change pathway in projects. So what that is the minimum you would ever do from a change perspective to ensure that your change effort was going to have a degree of success. Knowing that your trade-off is time, and again, it depends upon the level of experience that you might have as a change practitioner and confidence to be able to apply this critical path to your project. But I'll talk about some of the key elements to this critical path, the absolute must-haves. The first is understanding your stakeholder landscape. And you do this essentially at the beginning of any change project that you are being included in, or if you're working on it and you're dealing with the change side. Projects and project managers in this space should already have a stakeholder list. They often don't. Or they have one that they created at the beginning, but now they're so busy actually delivering the project and managing it, they haven't revisited it. So it is worth, as a changey, finding out if one exists, updating that, and also mapping it out in a number of ways. So if you think about this critical path, which is almost like the minimum documentation to do, there are many tools and templates which come with certain disciplines, and most of them you never use. So our approach in our Changing Projects course is we're going to take you through the operational level of change in projects, the different documents, templates, but then we highlight what are the minimum standards so that when you go into a project and don't have much time, that you are enabled and confident in being able to say, well, these are the minimum that I need to create to understand the change, to get a decent change plan together and be able to implement that change plan. The first I've mentioned, stakeholder mapping. This is really simple too. I don't really understand the concept, and you might have listened to one of my prior podcast episodes because I still don't understand the whole let's map the stakeholders in a matrix so that we can see who's the most impacted and who's the most influential. It is offensive. It's borderline offensive for stakeholders to, if they ever see that. And you're not really doing anything with it because it's not about where you assess them to be. It's actually about the engagement model you're putting into place. And that is why you create the stakeholder list and you start to realize who are my leadership stakeholders, who should be on there. If I map the impacts of this change and I find that there are certain leaders who aren't in that stakeholder list, then I'm going to raise that and talk about engagement with them and how that works and start to include them on the process so that from a project perspective, as you go through the phases and implementation, you don't get that resistance that can happen because someone's been missed from the conversation. So stakeholder mapping, impact assessment. The impact assessment is not necessarily a document that anyone really sees, but it's there for you as a change practitioner to understand the story. Who's impacted? How are they impacted? To be able to go into the project discussions and say, I just need some validation around this process, that these processes are the ones that are going to be impacted. Because if you've got a policy, typically there are procedures that link to the policy, or even if you read a policy, you'll see that there are procedures that are outlined there or that are specified there, whether it be a gift level, like a dollar gift amount, for example. If that changes, well, okay, so what form do people complete? How do they discuss that with their people leader? All of that and the information that you gather is also will form part of the briefing intervention or the training intervention as well. So they're all very important conversations. However, most impact assessments are not seen by the project team. You are collecting that information and data so that you can form up the story and play back the story and ensure that you have scoped in the required level of change support for the project and the relevant interventions. And again, if you're finding that, I've done my impact assessment, I'm finding that there's 3 or 4 leaders or managers that haven't been involved at all in this piece of work, who should be involved with user testing, or they should be involved with a showcased about the new policy, the new framework, the new procedure, the new system, then you can factor that into your change plan, which is the other MVP, is your change plan, which could take the form of an activity calendar. Again, what I would say is that you may not have time to document all of the steps into a change plan. It's great when you're in a very structured environment from an organization perspective. If there is time and there's the expectation that's documented, then go document it. I've done change plans and overviews in Word docs. I've done them in PowerPoint presentations, and always comes back to the activity calendar, which can just be in Excel. It could be a 1-page PowerPoint highlighting the key activities and audience and when that's going to happen, lining it up with the project. So you've got your stakeholders, you've got your impact assessment, which feeds into and should line up with your stakeholder mapping and requirement and engagement. Then you have the activity view of the change plan so that people can see what's happening and when, and you can then track to those activities. They're your minimum viable product. 3 very simple but deep documents that are going to help you manage the change and facilitate the change with others. Now, of course, off those 3 core documents, I'll have my impact assessment, but I will have a bit of an overview and a story of these are the impacts, so I can communicate to both the project team, I can validate it with the impacted areas, I can highlight the change risks off the back of those impacted areas as you go and as you're part of the design process and the development and the build. Most other activities, you're supporting the project side, UAT engagement, stakeholders, reference groups, testers, testing groups. They're elements that would be in your plan that you're organising for others, and yes, they have a lot of communication elements with them, but just at the bare minimum. Readiness assessments, and let's talk about some of the other typical documents you'll find. Being able to have a business case, for example. Most projects in most organisations don't have much of a business case. Hard to get hold of, hard to find. So just to get your expectation right on that. So therefore, from a change perspective, you can't really leverage that. Most organisations, or a lot of organisations, depending upon their size, may not even have org structures for you to be able to use to heat map impacts. So therefore, the change story and being able to highlight this is the current state, future state from your impact assessment. These are the processes that are affected. This is the then subsequent change plan, an activity calendar for the different pieces of work, and the change sponsorship requirement to that. That's really your MVP. Readiness assessments, it's a luxury. You can do progress updates, but true change readiness is an ability to survey and at different checkpoints. Again, if your organisation is structured, then yes, if you've got the time, and that could come into play for sure. And the change success measures and the wrap up could be done where you're documenting it yourself. And I would recommend that you always do that for your own benefit, if not for the project team's benefit, and if not for all of your stakeholders' benefit. So that's a nice to have. That's a difference, like a differential step change. One that I think adds a huge amount of value is to be able to do a bit of the lessons learned and then the change debrief, but it's not on your MVP. If you didn't have time, if you're working on multiple things or whatever that may look like, then you may not get the opportunity to do it, and it's just part of accepting that from a change perspective. So stakeholders, impact assessment, change plan / activities. And then you're delivering to those, and that would take up most of your time. So we do cover this in the Changing Projects course. Have a look at myvirtualchangemanager.com, sign up for our priority list so that you are notified when we are going to be heading into opening doors for our Changing Projects virtual live training course. It is coming up, and if you're looking for a practical change methodology, which does cover some of this MVP items, but also deep dives into some of the tips and traps that you can come across from a changing projects perspective if you're working on changing a project environment, whether that be as a business analyst, a project manager who wants to broaden your skill set and ensure that you're handling the change well. If you're a change practitioner, you might have done other accreditations and yet just be struggling with being able to apply the change methodology into the different organizations that you're working with, or even your current organization. Looking at how you can work with stakeholders and also being able to define your change approach, which is quite important from an individual perspective, but often never ever talked about and often overlooked, and yet it can make all the difference when you understand your identity when it comes to delivering change in organizations. So if that's of interest to you, come to myvirtualchangemanager.com and sign up so that you can be first in the know when we're going to be opening doors. I hope you have a wonderful day, and just remember that change matters because you, your people, your organization, it all matters.